Chapter 4. I lay awake for hours, aware of the traffic rumbling past on the street. Ordinarily, I didn't notice it, but now my mind was reeling. Not only would we have to move 8 roomfuls of furniture into 4, but also all of Corey's waterproofing equipment, his heavy machinery, the skis. A stream of light flickered down the wallpaper I'd hung 10 years before, a muted green colonial pattern I had loved from the start, and had grown even fonder of with time. Just the sight of it brought misgivings about leaving our house. We had put so much of ourselves into it during the 10 years we had lived there. We completely refurbished it, laid a concrete floor in the basement, installed an iron fireman oil burner that transformed a cold, miserable dwelling into a warm, cozy home, replaced the roof, refinished the attic, extended the living room, and installed pine paneling on the fireplace wall. Corey stirred, took a deep breath, and settled back again. I wasn't surprised that he could sleep so soundly. He never took the cares of the day to bed with him. I was aware of the faint odor of industrial chemicals in his prematurely graying hair. Even though he showered regularly, he could not be induced to shampoo more than once a week. Did I think he wanted all his hair to fall out? Another Norwegian old wives' tale? Strangely enough, his features were as much Italian as Norwegian, I thought. Our first encounter had been in 1934 at the bar at Mount Rainier Lodge, where he sat with my father, who had his wallet open, buying him a beer. I was 16 and had come up to ask for an advance on my allowance, a practice my sisters and I had honed to a fine art, after learning that Papa was most agreeable under such circumstances. At the time, Corey was the rave of the ski circuit, having earned national ratings. He was one of only 4 Northwest skiers rated Class A in all 4 skiing disciplines: jumping, cross-country, downhill, and slalom. Papa, who had competed in ski jumping while attending the University of Wisconsin, enjoyed the camaraderie. From the time Papa first outfitted his 3 little daughters in ski clothes and taught us to ski, he had told us about the Norwegians in Wisconsin, a strange bunch who ate the world's smelliest food, lutefisk. He had a joke to go with it. A man complained about skunks under his house. The pest control man suggested a solution: place lutefisk under the house. Soon after, the man called back, "It got rid of the skunks. But now what do I do about the Norwegians?" I admired Corey's skiing prowess, but other than that, I took little notice of him. He was 13 years my senior and married, although, according to the grapevine, it was an on-again, off-again affair. Our second encounter had been in 1937 when I rode with him and his brother to the Rose Festival tournament on Mount Hood. It was a gala occasion, my first escape from parental supervision, and an introduction to the world of wild oats. On top of all that, I won the tournament. Our third encounter was in 1940 at our ski cabin at Snoqualmie Pass, where some ski jumpers were partying. I had just returned from Fairbanks, Alaska, where I had spent 2 years singing and playing accordion in nightclubs. Rumor had it that Corey had just been divorced. My older sister, Florence, who had also just been divorced, set her cap for Corey. To my amazement, Corey set his cap for me. It was a switch from our younger days when my only dates were Flora's boyfriend's younger brothers. I enjoyed Corey's attentions, but thought of them only as a friendly interlude. My plan was to return to Fairbanks within a few months to marry. But as I saw Corey more frequently, I began thinking he was the kind of man a girl could build a future with. He was steady, even-tempered, and treated me like a queen. When he indulged, which he did only occasionally and moderately, he never displayed the emotional volatility of Cain. The only clue to his relaxed condition was his posture and the way he held out his right hand, with his little finger extended straight. This distinctive gesture was a telltale sign and a source of amusement for family and friends. With a change of heart, I penned a Dear John letter to Alaska. Corey and I married in Seattle on June 7th, 1941. We spent our first summer in an apartment on Lake Union. I loved it there, walking to the store for groceries, cooking meals on a 2-burner hot plate. When the job he was working on in Seattle ended, Corey wanted to return to Portland. However, war clouds loomed, and he was offered a job as a ski consultant for the War Department in Seattle. I was happy to remain in the town where I'd grown up. That fall, the rental house at 4419 SE 49th Street, which Papa had bought with money I inherited, became vacant, so we moved in. World War II began on December 7, 1941, 6 months after we were married. Despite the war, it was a particularly good time for us. Corey enjoyed his work supervising crews, some of whom were Italian war prisoners. in handling, repairing, and shipping skis to American ski troops in Italy. We made extensive repairs on the house and had our first 2 children, Freya on September 4th, 1942, and Sigurd on May 29th, 1944. I had never been so happy and would have been content to stay forever in Seattle. At the war's end, however, Corey was determined to move back to Portland. He had top priority to buy surplus skis from the War Department and planned to establish a ski business with a friend he'd known in Norway, who owned a car repair shop. It sounded like a good idea, but oh, how I wish we'd heeded my father's opinion of Corey's qualifications. He's too good-hearted, too old country to be in business. He considers a handshake a contract. House hunting in Portland had been a nightmare. Very few houses were available, and those that were undesirable. Our search finally narrowed down to the Holgate House, a forlorn wreck of a place filled with dilapidated furniture, old medicine bottles, soiled gauze, newspapers dating back to the Dark Ages, and vessels which my father called peapots. Its one big asset was that it had a wonderful big yard. We signed the contract of sale on December 11th, 1945, for $4,500. Because we had saved our money, we were able to pay $1,750 down, with the balance of $2,750 to be paid in monthly installments. Packing, cleaning, and renting the Seattle house, and moving in the middle of winter, was an exercise in sackcloth and ashes. All was compounded by the fact that I was uncomfortably pregnant. I was painting the living room just days after our move. Ragnar, Corey's brother, had time available and promised to help me, so we set to work. While we painted, Mama and Papa drove up in their big Buick on their way to California to spend the winter. Papa, in striped overalls, his leisure attire, began an inspection of the property. "Nice big lot high above the street. Good way to keep children at home, but what a jungle," he observed. I thought to myself that he should have seen it before Corey and his father had started whacking blackberries. Papa went into the basement and remarked, "Good floor joists." Mama noted that had been his major sales pitch when they moved from Spokane into a neglected house in Seattle after World War I. Mama had been pregnant then too, with her 3rd child, and she had a very difficult premature birth. Papa went up the basement stairs. "Good floor plan," he said. He appreciated having the bathroom on the 1st floor, which he considered a major plus. Papa then went up to the 2nd floor. I resumed my painting. Mama objected. "You shouldn't be stretching like that. It could bring on—" I muttered to myself, another old wives' tale. The fact was, doctors had told me that I was built to bear children, that I could have a dozen, and it wouldn't faze me. Mama cooked dinner, and we sat down at our little drop-leaf kitchen table. Papa poured himself and Corey a beer, and like the investigative attorney he was, began asking Corey questions. Where was he going to carry on this ski business? What equipment would he need? How would he provide for his family before the profits began coming in? I began to suspect that Corey didn't have the answers. Papa bought us a Christmas tree, and Mama, the kids, and I decorated it. The next day I stood on the high bank with Freya and Sig beside me and waved them off. I was torn between heartache and resentment. So carefree they were, at liberty to do whatever they wanted, merrily on their way to sunny warmth. Meanwhile I was being abandoned in this miserable, freezing house, imprisoned in junk, germs, and— yes, I really meant it now— pregnancy. As the car disappeared, I burst into weeping. I knelt down and gathered Freya and Sig to me. The warmth of their little bodies gave me a yearning to be a child again. I led them back into the cold, dreary house and put them into our bed. I sat beside them until I knew they were asleep. Hard as I tried, I could not shake the gloom that hung over me. Finally, I tiptoed down the hall and into the living room. Paintbrushes and buckets had been pushed into a corner. I knew I would have to get back to them soon, but I just couldn't face them now. Instead, I sank down onto the old Davenport by the Christmas tree and burst into fresh tears. The next thing I knew, Corey was in the room. "How soon will you be ready to go to the folks' house?" My spirits rose. The whole Gustafsson family was looking forward to the first joyous Christmas since Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, the day that had thrust America into World War II. Now, all the members of the family involved in the war would be coming home again safe and sound. Ragnar had been discharged from the Seabees after 4 years in the South Pacific. Cousin Kurt had returned from a 3-year stint in the Navy. Gurley and her husband, who had spent the war in the shipyard in Bremerton, would be there. Only Svea's husband Bob would be absent, awaiting discharge from the Navy. To add to the excitement, all 3 of the young married women of the family were pregnant. Girlie was expecting her second child in January, Svea her first child in February, and I was expecting my third in March or April. I was happy to be adding to our family. I had decided that I wanted 4 children. In fact, I thought the Gustafsson family was the ideal. 2 boys and 2 girls. It had been a hilariously happy occasion. Grandma Gustafsson had cooked her whole array of Norwegian holiday goodies. Grandpa Gustafsson had produced pitchers of red wine made from his extensive grape arbor. The fellows drank too much and talked about the bright future. We expectant mothers worked on our layettes. Girlie was hemming flannel cloth for diapers, while Svea and I were knitting little sweaters and mittens in the famous Norwegian pattern called selbu. Svea had already knit the little outfits for the first 3 grandchildren, Thurston, Freya, and Sigurd. If anyone had hinted that tragedy was lurking just around the corner, no one would have believed it. We all felt invincible, expecting only life. The sounds of traffic on the street had increased. I wiped my eyes on the sheet and resolved to push those thoughts behind me. It was something I couldn't dwell on. It sapped my energies. I had enough to dwell on and sap my energies. Was this move to Happy Valley what I really wanted? Corey was beginning to stir.